This setting of Behemoth making his way to the river also includes the idea of traps being set for him in the following verse. Behemoth, if ever one could capture him, would be the ultimate prize of any hunter. However, this verse is not without its difficulties. What God said to Job at the time, and how his words have arrived to us today, hold some discrepancies, I am sure. The book of Job contains not a few difficult sentences to comprehend. Job 40:24, the last verse in the chapter about Behemoth, has been notoriously challenging to translators. Obviously something has gone awry down the centuries of copying. The book of Job is older than the Torah and probably didn't have the great protection that the Torah had. Be that as it may, the King James renders the verse thusly, Job 40:24, He, Behemoth, taketh it with his eyes, his nose pierceth through snares. The first thing that we may notice is to confirm the uncapturability of Behemoth by man's entrapments, for his nose pierces through snares. However, the first poetical stick in the verse suggests that Behemoth takes the aforementioned river with his eyes. Well, some rather abstract poetry would be required here to make some sense at all. Furthermore, what has the taking of the river with his eyes got to do with his nose piercing through traps? After all, the language is assuredly poetical. The sticks here do not correspond in meaning like the subsequent verses do. The first stick, simply put, doesn't fit within the grand scheme of things, or it fits rather unsuitably and undesirably. Most translations today do try and forcibly connect the first stick to the second, but unsuccessfully, in my opinion. I believe that one course of deductive reasoning within the text gets us closer to the actual meaning. The Hebrew word used here for snare, mokes, means, in the first instance, bait or lure, that which is used to ensnare. But the line, his nose pierceth through bait, doesn't work. By extension, this Hebrew word may mean snare or trap, but primarily the bait or the lure is intended. In Hebrew, there are several other words that mean the actual trap or snare, and more specifically so, i.e. not the bait. For example, Psalm 140 verse 5, the proud have hid a snare for me. The Hebrew word used here, pak, means the actual framework of the trap, not the bait. Pakak means to entrap. And if we look to the book of the prophet Amos, we can see there the use of both Hebrew words, mokes and pak, at their most distinctive meanings. Amos 3:5, can a bird fall in a snare upon the earth where no bait is for him? In other words, one cannot catch a bird in a bird trap without there being bait therein first. The bait won't simply fall into an unbaited trap. Now, if we turn our attention to the Greek Septuagint, we find there, at Job 40:24, the Greek word translated from the Hebrew, which was not the Masoretic text, but Hebrew not known to be in existence today, the Greek word enskolumenos. Enskolumenos is a form of the verb enskolumai, which means catch in a snare, which can be abbreviated to ensnare. And so we see that the actual framework of the trap is intended in the Septuagint, i.e. not the bait. And if we look to the venerable translation of the Septuagint into English, Sir Lancelot C.L. Brenton's English translation, there we can affirm that the framework of the trap is indeed intended. Job 40:19, yet one shall take him in his sight, one shall catch him with a cord and pierce his nose. Obviously, no one ever assumes a cord, and this is the cord of a noose, to be the bait, but really the framework of a trap only. And it's worth noticing also that Paul W. Esposito, on his revised and edited edition towards the Complete Apostles' Bible, never altered Brenton's rendering. Another dedicated source for the Septuagint is contained in the more recent Orthodox Study Bible, compiled in 2008. This translation itself is sourced from Brenton's translation. However, it is worth investigating because the translators also used the New King James, thus the Masoretic text, towards comparative matches. That is, any English translations of Brenton's that matched the New King James were retained, and snare, which firstly means bait in the Masoretic text, was evidently not matched with snare of the Septuagint. Therefore, in the Orthodox Study Bible, it is apparent that snare, as in the framework of the trap, took precedence over snare, which most distinctively means bait, from the Masoretic. Job 40:24, though he takes it in his eyes, or one pierces his nose with a snare, i.e. framework. Accordingly, seeing as the Septuagint holds the framework of the trap, and the Masoretic holds the bait of a trap, it then becomes admissible that both snare and bait were in the original text of Job 40:24, just like we saw in Amos 3:5. And this solution ought not to be dismissed readily. For when we consider this poetical device used in a verse, that of having two different words which are tantamount to the same thing, we can find instances of it throughout the Old Testament wherever poetry is used. For example, Habakkuk 3:7, I saw the tents of Cushan in affliction, and the curtains of the land of Midian did tremble. Here, tents and curtains mean the same thing, used concurrently within their respective sticks. And it needn't be that this device be reserved for poetry only, for it is not uncommon for it to be found in the Old Testament accompanied by a hint of metricity, even while using two words which are not necessarily synonyms, but related metonymously, two words which also stand for the same thing, for example, a city's fortification. Ezekiel 26:9, and he, Nebuchadnezzar, shall set engines of war against thy walls, and with his axes he shall break down thy towers. Anciently, the term walls and towers was a metonym used for a city's fortification, and again you will see many instances of this throughout the Old Testament. I myself have included these two examples because I worked with them in previous discourses. But even so, there are many cases, even within the book of Job. Job 18:8, for he is cast into a net by his own feet, and he walketh upon a snare. And we can see that not only is it usual for the two words in question to be tantamount to the same thing, but both sticks entirely are tantamount to the same single meaning. And the case for having both snare and bait in Job 40:24 becomes even more plausible when we reconsider the pronoun it, which currently seems to be referring, quite strangely, to the river of the preceding verse. This pronoun could actually be expressing the bait. The commentators of the Orthodox Study Bible do mention bait in their note on Job 40:24 as being expressed by the pronoun. And seeing as there is no other antecedent between the river and the pronoun that we can assign the pronoun to, it stands to reason that bait has either been replaced by the pronoun or bait was mentioned already in the first stick of the verse before the pronoun, but has since been dropped. And if true, then the noun snare in the KJV can actually mean a snare, as in the framework, rather than bait. And so, with these things considered, Job 40:24 may be rendered thusly. Job 40:24, he taketh it, the bait, with his eyes, his nose pierceth through snares.